what happened in our nation's capital on January the 6th. Because while a lot of us predicted that Republicans would try to rewrite the history, to some extent, of what happened that day, what we didn't expect, at least what I did not expect, was that it would be so soon and so
truth is being
brazen.
censored and covered up. As a result, the DOJ is harassing peaceful patriots across the country.
It was Trump supporters who lost their lives that day, not Trump supporters who were taking the lives of others. There was no insurrection, and to call it an insurrection, in my opinion, is a bold-faced lie. Watching the TV footage of those who entered the Capitol and walked through Statuary Hall showed people in an orderly fashion staying between the stanchions and ropes taking videos and pictures. You know, if you didn't know the TV footage was a video from January the 6th, you would actually think it was a normal tourist visit.
Wait a minute, Congressman. Is that you in this picture with your colleagues trying to barricade the door of the House chamber against normal tourist visitors? Is that what you always do when a tour group comes through? Really? And if they were normal tourists, would I have to warn you that this next video may be too graphic for some viewers? It shows a Capitol police officer being assaulted by rioters as he was crushed in a doorway. Does this look normal to you? Does it look normal when tourists smash the front windows of the Capitol to get in? There was nothing normal about January the 6th. Those people were not tourists. And any response since that hasn't been shock or anger or sadness or outrage isn't normal either. It's likely gaslighting, propaganda, or fealty to dear leader Donald J. Trump. There's nothing normal about stripping the number 3 Republican in the House of her leadership position simply because she refuses to boost the now former president who incited the insurrection. This morning, Congresswoman Liz Cheney warned that history could repeat itself.
Are you suggesting that January 6th could happen again, or maybe something worse?
I think there's no question. I mean, you know, we've now seen the consequences. We've seen how far President Trump was willing to go.
The Republican Party is now firmly back with Donald Trump and his lies. The ball is in his court, as they say, right next to the tennis pavilion Melania constructed in the middle of a global pandemic. The former president has purged his party. He's got the voter ID laws he wants in key swing states he lost. And he's got Mitch McConnell and Nikki Haley, his critics, saying they'll back him if he runs again, even though, as I say, they criticized him in the past. This is now Donald Trump's party, if you ever had any doubts. And every other Republican is just living in it. So given this backdrop, tonight we kick off the show with a different kind of guest. We don't often have former top Trump officials on the show because many of them, as you know, have a history of lying and gaslighting. But we're making an exception tonight because we think it's important that Alyssa Farah has spoken out against the big lie that Trump lost the election. The big lie that Trump won the election, I should say, from his perspective. She has spoken out against the Capitol insurrection. But she did work for the Trump administration, for the White House, for more than 3 years, so there is much to discuss and challenge her on. Her final stint was as White House Strategic Director for Communications until she resigned in December. And Alyssa joins me on the show now. Alyssa Farah, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show, and I appreciate you doing so, I really do. I want to talk about you and your time with Donald Trump in a moment, but let's start with the Republican Party. You very admirably opposed your party's attempt to overturn the election. You quit the White House when you weren't allowed to acknowledge Trump's loss. You called out the big lie. And yet today, 7 months on from the election, with the removal of Liz Cheney, the top 4 leadership positions in the House are held by people who voted to overturn the election. Kevin McCarthy, Steve Scalise, Gary Palmer, Elise Stefanik, of course. What has happened to your party? Your party's got more extreme, not less, since January the 6th.
Well, Maddie, thank you for having me. Listen, the GOP is careening down what I would say is both a strategically unwise path, but also a morally reprehensible one, just to be completely candid with you. Liz Cheney did the right thing. It's actually, we shouldn't be commending people for simply telling the facts. Like, facts matter. We need to tell the truth. She did the right thing, but that shouldn't be brave or heroic. That should just be what our leaders do. But unfortunately, here's the problem that the GOP is facing. This isn't going away. Voters have not forgotten about January 6th. The Republican Party has a numbers problem. We need addition, not subtraction, to be able to win back the principles that we actually care about. But right now, there's this decision that we care more about loyalty to the former president, care more about trying to gloss over what happened with the election and then January 6th. And, you know, my unsolicited advice to my fellow Republicans would be, the truth tends to come to the top. It's better to address it now, to come to grips with what went wrong and accept it, because we're going to be dealing with this going into midterms. We're going to be dealing with it going into 2024.
Yes, indeed. And you admirably and bluntly... Sorry, I was going to say, you bluntly called the attackers on January the 6th terrorists in an interview with Politico. You've praised Liz Cheney, as you said a moment ago, for speaking the truth about it. And yet you also say Elise Stefanik was, quote, the best candidate to replace Cheney. How can you support replacing Liz Cheney with an election denier, with someone who voted to try and overturn the election, even on the night of January the 6th, after all the terrorism, who went on Steve Bannon's podcast just the other week to support the crazy audit of the election by the Arizona GOP, who still disputes Joe Biden's victory? Alyssa, you seem to want to have your cake and eat it.
Well, I would say this. Lisa is somebody I know very well. She's a highly educated, serious policymaker. She's actually a very moderate Republican member who I think votes her district and legislates her district. I will say this. I don't know every detail of where she came down on different aspects of the election, though I know if you asked her today, she would say Joe Biden is the president. That's a starting point. Listen, we've got to do better than that. We should have acknowledged it, you know, the day the race was called. But she's somebody I have confidence in to make good, sound policy for the American public.
Alyssa, policy aside, and you're right, she does have a quote-unquote more moderate voting record than Liz Cheney even, but Elise Stefanik still stands by her ridiculous claim that 1 in 4 votes cast in Fulton County, Georgia, 140,000 votes, were fraudulent or illegitimate. A quarter of all the votes cast in that county. That's bonkers, isn't it? How can anyone who holds that view be allowed anywhere near the leadership of your party? I assume you don't agree that 1 in 4 votes there were fraudulent.
Oh, I certainly don't. I'm actually not familiar with the comments of Elise Stefanik, so I wouldn't want to comment on them further. But no, that's absolutely ridiculous. We've litigated this in states around the country, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona. They've been thrown out. There's no there, and the sooner that my party accepts, we just came up short. We didn't win over enough people. We lost women. We lost older voters. We need to start winning them back on what we're actually for, what we actually believe in. Yes. And what I'm fearing is that people who actually have policy positions that they want to share, Liz Cheney, are getting pushed aside in the party for people who it's just pure adherence to supporting one man, which, by the way, is not a conservative belief. The idea of just complete loyalty to one person over virtues is just fundamentally unconservative. But here we are.
Well, so let's talk about that one person. You have, in past interviews, very admirably, I'll say again, admitted that Donald Trump lied to his supporters about the election. And as I mentioned, you also very bluntly, very rightly called those Trump supporters who attacked the Capitol terrorists. So would you accept the logic of your own argument that your former boss, former President of the United States, Donald Trump, is an inciter of terrorism?
I think that I've spoken about it before. He played a role in inciting the violence on the Capitol. I went on CNN shortly after, and I said, in terms of the second impeachment, he shouldn't relitigate that day because the facts are not on his side. There was a constitutional question in terms of impeaching somebody who's no longer in office, but it's very clear. The words are there. We know what he said, and we know how, more importantly, we know how the people who stormed the Capitol interpreted it. Many of them are on the record now and have said this is what we thought the president wanted us to do. And it's tragic. Part of why I'm on your program, by the way, is because I care about conveying this to people who maybe aren't Republican voters, to know there is going to be a moment in this party where it's not all Donald Trump all the time. Our politics are cyclical, but I hope that my party comes around to the actual principles of what we stand for. There was a time where I was proud to work for Donald Trump. We created an economically inclusive economy, lowest unemployment for women, for African Americans, for Hispanics. But all of that is overshadowed by this myth that we're continuing to perpetuate. And I would note, Kristen Welker made a good point on your network earlier, which is Trump's about to get out and start doing rallies again. This isn't going away. So to my friends, to the Kevin McCarthy's of the world, so this is not something that you're going to be able to just brush aside.
So you say you're proud about having worked in the White House. A lot of people would say there was much to be ashamed of well before January the 6th. They say that it's great that you resigned in December and spoke out against the big lie. But a lot of your critics, and I wonder what you say to your critics who say it was too little too late, who ask, why didn't you resign earlier, Alyssa? Why didn't you quit when he outrageously told 4 non-white women in Congress to go back to where they came from? Why didn't you quit when he lied about COVID being like the flu, or talked about putting disinfectant into people's arms? Why didn't you quit when he was separating children from their parents at the border?
Well, my answer to that simply is governing's a lot different than campaigning. I never signed up to be on Donald Trump's campaign. I actually turned down the opportunity to the first time that he ran. But once somebody is the president and the leader of the free world, where the entire U.S. federal government, the most powerful military on the planet, is under his control, I believe that people who are willing to and who are serious should step up and try to serve. And there were people in the White House who I knew reluctantly stayed when there were very hard things said, that there were hard policies that they saw enacted, because they knew they could marginally do better. I'm not asking for any sort of a pat on the back. I think I've managed to alienate folks both on the right and the left, but I do believe in public service. One thing that you mentioned, I was with Vice President.
Understood. Understood, but doesn't public service involve you also saying, I can't work for a racist, misogynist bully who tells black and brown women to go back to where they came from? How do you go into work the next day and work for a person and say, I'm a senior official for a president who says racist things like that?
Well, as a brown woman, I'm Lebanese and Syrian. It is challenging. I remember counseling him, and while I do keep my conversations I've had directly with the president private, counseling him publicly, that the easiest thing that you can do, you can wake up every morning and condemn white supremacy. That shouldn't be hard. Pulling teeth and making it something difficult was just an unnecessary thing that I repeatedly told him, like, let's make this just unequivocal, condemn it, and let's move on. But you know what? I would rather have people in the room who are willing to speak up and say those things. But I should also note this. I believed in about 90% of his agenda. I'm still a Republican. I still didn't vote for Joe Biden. Do I think it's probably better following January 6th that he's in office? Absolutely. But I believe in Republican principles. I believe that we're better on the economy, we're better on national defense. And I'm going to keep fighting for who my party is.
I understand you believe in Republican principles. I respect that. Republican principles, low taxation, small government, family values. That wasn't Trump. Trump was taking kids from the border. Trump was authoritarianism. Trump was telling black and brown people to go back to where they came from. Trump was lying about, lying about hush money payments to Stormy Daniels. You were there through all of that. I'm just wondering how you justify that. Is it just through the tax cuts? Like, what is the reasoning? I'm genuinely interested.
No, not by it.
Someone like you says, I'm going to carry on.
Let me give you kind of... Oh, yes, just two quick answers there, which I was going to allude to. So I was with Vice President Pence during the family separation crisis, which was awful. It was terrible. It was inhumane. I think we did reverse it within our administration, but it was because people were willing to be in the room and advocate for it. I remember Secretary Azar, who had a role in overseeing it with HHS, push back and help reverse that policy. Vice President Pence quietly behind the scenes push back. If every person who disagreed with things that the president did up and left and, got their minute of putting out a righteous statement, but then were on the outside and not in a position to influence policy, we would have had worse outcomes. So that's my position there. What I would say is, no, there's more than that I believed in, that we accomplished and worked on. And the federal government, the presidency is bigger than any one man. As an Arab American, it was truly a great moment to be in the Oval Office during the signing of the Abraham Accords. There are things that we have to be proud of, but we also need to reject the untruths, and we need to live based on facts and just move on from this moment in our history.
We do. We're out of time, but I have to ask on that very moment. And you said, one question people would say is, why did you help try and re-elect him? Now you're speaking out against him. Great. If Donald Trump runs again in 2024, as looks likely, will you as a Republican oppose his candidacy, or will you, like Nikki Haley or Mitch McConnell, say, yeah, he did bad things on January 6th, but if he's the candidate, I'll support him? Will you say tonight, I will oppose Donald Trump if he's the Republican candidate in 2024?
Yes, I will not be supporting Donald Trump in 2024.
Alyssa Farah, appreciate you coming on the show tonight. I'm glad it's easy for you. It isn't for some in your party. I appreciate you coming on the show. Unveiled their plan for a response to the January 6th attack. The plan includes $1.9 billion to address security flaws at the Capitol, as well as a bipartisan 9/11-style commission to delve into exactly what went wrong that day. The commission would produce a final report detailing its findings and give recommendations to prevent future attacks by the end of this year. Nancy Pelosi says the House could vote as soon as next week on the proposed commission. The action from Democrats is in stark contrast to many insurrection-denying GOP members like Georgia Congressman Andrew Clyde, who, as I mentioned a moment ago, likened the rioters this week to tourists. For more on this, I'm joined now by Democratic Congresswoman, chair of the Progressive Caucus, Representative Pramila Jayapal. Thanks so much for coming back on the show, Congresswoman. We all saw those terrifying images of you on January the 6th as the rioters tried to take over Congress. How do you respond to comments from GOP colleagues of yours?
Mike Pence was he was chased down. People were trying to hang Mike Pence, calling for Mike Pence to be hanged, trying to kill Nancy Pelosi, and hundreds of insurrectionists have been charged already with federal crimes for what happened on January 6th. And so my belief is that these Republicans who refuse to accept what happened on January 6th or who continue to, try to rewrite history are actually a serious national security threat to our democracy. Because if we don't get to the bottom of what happened on January 6th, if we don't hold accountable those who are involved, then our democracy will suffer. And that is a very, very serious thing that we're looking at. And I think you heard Liz Cheney this morning. I heard you talk about this in your opening. This could happen again. And I think that for those of us who were trapped in the Capitol, and you showed that shot of me there, it isn't just the personal trauma that we deal with. It's the fact that we understand how deeply fragile this democracy is and how close we came on January 6th to losing it.
So, Congresswoman, given all that, when you see President Biden meeting this week with Republicans, including Kevin McCarthy, who voted to overturn the election, when President Biden meets with them to search for a quote-unquote bipartisan solution on infrastructure, how do you even work with a party that doesn't accept the legitimacy of the presidential election result? I hear the word bipartisan these days, and I feel like I'm losing my mind. How do you do deals with people who deny insurrections, deny election results?
Well, we can't. I mean, I think it's been extremely hard for us, particularly in the House. It is impossible, really, to work with the vast majority of Republicans on the other side because they won't admit what is true. They have become, the vast majority of them have become a one-man cult. And the only thing that is required to be a member of the Republican Party, apparently, is to pledge fealty to Donald Trump and the big lie. Yes. And Liz Cheney was kicked out of leadership because she didn't do that. So, I have no faith whatsoever that Republicans are going to suddenly see the light and come along and, come up with a bipartisan deal. And remember that it's not just Kevin McCarthy. Mitch McConnell in the Senate said 100% of his focus was on stopping the Biden agenda. So the idea that we're suddenly going to find, a bipartisan deal and be able to make the kind of once-in-a-generation investment that President Biden has laid out, and that we are pushing for that and more, is inconceivable. So what I have said to the White House, what I've said publicly is, look, if they want to come along, they got to do it now. And I just have very little faith maybe that that's going to happen. I think we should move forward with a big, bold package, get this done, and move the country forward.
I mean, I'm with you when it comes to lacking faith in any kind of bipartisan solution. Staying on the topic of safety, Congresswoman, your colleague Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was this week harassed by fellow Congresswoman from the GOP, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who chased her down, quote, shouting at her and asking why she supports Antifa and Black Lives Matter and yelling, why do you support terrorists, which is ironic coming from Marjorie Taylor Greene. But it's not the first time that Greene has gone after AOC. There's this video of her in 2019 when she was a private citizen. Have a watch.
And stop walking your door and come out and face the American citizens that you serve. If you want to be a big girl, you need to get rid of your diaper and come out and be able to talk to the American citizens instead of us having to use a flap, a little flap.
It's kind of like hers.
Sad.
Nancy Pelosi is saying she thinks this will require an ethics investigation. Marjorie Taylor Greene is the same woman who had a photo removed by Facebook in which she was holding a gun next to an image of the squad, including AOC. I mean, isn't this unprecedented to have members of Congress basically in fear of their lives from another member of Congress? Is ethics enough? I feel like Marjorie Taylor Greene hasn't done enough at this point to justify a vote on expulsion, or am I being hyperbolic?
Yeah, no, I mean, I've signed on to that resolution to expel her from Congress, but I want to be clear about something. It isn't just Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, it's Marie Newman, it's Cori Bush, it's Eric Swalwell. I mean, there are numerous members that are being harassed by Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Kevin McCarthy, the leader of the Republican Party, and Steve Scalise and Elise Stefanik are responsible for letting that continue. They kicked Justin Amash off of his committees for criticizing Trump, and they have refused to take any action against Marjorie Taylor Greene. No action. So they are, going along with this, in fact, encouraging it because she's raising a lot of money, and they're hoping probably that she's going to continue to raise money for that.
Congresswoman, we've got 30 seconds left, but I have to ask you, the situation in Gaza. This week, progressive Democrats, we've seen them be more critical of Israel than I've ever seen in my lifetime, members of Congress being very critical of Israel. Are things changing in the Democratic Party on Israel and Palestine? Sorry, only 30 seconds left. I want to get your take.
Israel's behavior has gotten so outrageous with the annexations over more than, several years, human rights abuses, that I think it is starting to change. And I believe President Biden needs to be far stronger than he has been so far. This is a human rights crisis, and we need to address it.
Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, thank you so much for being with us this evening. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Coming up, the problem with how some people talk about business. The tech giant took in nearly $3 million during our last commercial break alone, and more than $108 billion in the first quarter of this year. Let's discuss all this with Brad Stone. He's the senior executive editor at Global Technology at Bloomberg News and the author of the new book, Amazon Unbound, Jeff Bezos and the Invention of a Global Empire. Brad, thanks so much for coming on the show. Congratulations on the new book. You say that Amazon is getting, quote, perilously close to invincible. What does that mean for democracy, Brad? What's to stop a person with as much money as Jeff Bezos from controlling our democracy, from being invincible when it comes to our political system holding him to account?
Well, the reason I said that, the reason I wrote that, was because I looked at the scandals that Amazon and Jeff Bezos had been through over the past few years. The blundering of the HQ2 search, Bezos's personal saga, the antitrust investigations, and they hadn't missed a step, particularly in the pandemic, as you note. And that kind of wealth, that kind of power does confer on Jeff Bezos and his colleagues some influence. I mean, I look at last week, Maria Cantwell, the senator from Washington, proposing legislation to redo NASA's conference of a moon contract on SpaceX, kind of shutting out Jeff Bezos' own Blue Origin. But look, I mean, it cuts both ways. I mean, the federal government is looking at Amazon right now. The wealth and power makes it a target. The FTC is investigating Amazon. The EU is investigating Amazon. The AGs in California and New York have opened investigations. So he's got influence. Amazon's a huge lobbyist, 18 million in 2020, but it also makes it more of a target.
Brad, we live in a country where billionaires largely are celebrated, where we're told by a lot of our political leaders to celebrate American corporate success stories. I wonder, having written this book, do you believe the world is better off with Amazon as it currently exists in it? And I wonder what independent booksellers might say in answer to that question, or Amazon employees who are pushing to unionize.
Mehdi, it's absolutely the animating question on my book. Is the world better off with Bezos and Amazon in it? And look, I mean, there are arguments on both sides. I mean, on the one hand, this company has created $1.6 trillion in market value, mostly for investors, in some small, significant part for Jeff Bezos himself. It's enabled a lot of convenience and selection and low prices and all that. It's ushered in products like Alexa into the world. I mean, some people enjoy those products. At the same time, it's changed the nature of work, added a fair amount of kind of chaos to our global economies, an increase in the number of sort of accidents on the highways and on our roads as Amazon delivers more of its packages. So, where I kind of come out on the great global ledger for Amazon, it probably has been beneficial, but there are certainly things that it can do and it should be doing to kind of clean up its act as it gets ever more powerful.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who lived through the pandemic with Amazon, regardless of their politics, would say Amazon helped them. I think that's undeniable. Let me say this. Jeff Bezos has announced he will be stepping down as CEO before the end of the year, though he will still play some role as the company's executive chairman. What will a post-Bezos Amazon look like? Will it be a post-Bezos Amazon?
Well, that's actually the right question, Mehdi. I mean, I don't see him fully untangling right away. He says he's going to stick around and work on new projects as executive chairman. Andy Jassy, his longtime deputy, will take the CEO role. I go back to that antitrust subcommittee last summer where Jeff Bezos was sitting there on Zoom alongside Mark Zuckerberg and Tim Cook, and he doesn't want to be there. He doesn't want to be the face of Amazon when it comes to Washington antitrust scrutiny, so that'll be Andy Jassy. But going forward, I do think Jeff Bezos will be the loudest voice in the conference room, and so probably in the near term, things aren't going to change, at least until that yacht that you mentioned is ready and Bezos is kind of spending more of his time sailing the high seas.
Yachts, plural. Brad, one of the fascinating things about your book is you managed to track down the person who provided the voice for Alexa through canvassing the voice actor community, I believe. She had recorded radio ads for products such as Mott's apple juice and the Volkswagen Passat, and you recognized her voice. Tell me about that. Did you get to speak to her, to Alexa herself?
Right. Well, I had to do a fair amount of sleuthing, and it turns out the voice of Alexa is a voice actress named Nina Raleigh. She lives in Boulder. I kind of did all my due diligence and sleuthing and figured out it was her, and I did give her a call. She's under NDA. She couldn't talk to me. She got off the phone fairly quickly, but it was sort of unmistakable. That voice is very distinctive. But no, to answer your question, I did not talk to her at length.
I wonder if she asked Alexa to hang up on you. Brad Stone, author of the new book, Amazon Unbound, Jeff Bezos and the Invention of a Global Empire. Thank you so much for your time. Congratulations on the book.
Thanks, Mehdi.
Thank you all for watching the show tonight. We'll be right back here next Sunday, of course, at 8 p.m. Eastern. You can catch me Monday through Thursday.